There is a particular cruelty in being invited somewhere only to be turned away at the door. It leaves no bruise, only a footman's soft apologetic murmur that your name cannot be found on the list, delivered loudly enough for 300 people to overhear. When Lady Sabina Crestwood sent her penniless ward to the grandest ball of the season, that murmur was the entire point. The girl was meant to break upon the marble steps and be laughed out of society for good. Instead, a man no one in that ballroom dared approach had been watching from the top of the grand staircase, and without a single word, he began to come down. The hired carriage smelled of damp straw, and another woman's cheap violet perfume, and Verity Ashdown sat very upright inside it, partly from breeding, mostly because the seat springs had collapsed on the left, and dignity was the only thing keeping her from sliding into the corner like a dropped parcel. She was 23, though. The women at her aunt's dinners already spoke of her in the past tense. Poor Verity. They would sigh over the fish course. So frightfully clever with her hands. Such a pity she hasn't the face for a husband. Her face was perfectly serviceable. It simply declined to arrange itself into delight on command, and in a drawing-room that was considered nearly as ruinous as poverty. Poverty she also had in abundance. It was the one inheritance her guardian had permitted her to keep. Tonight she wore the single gown that had survived 4 seasons of being let out, taken in, and finally dyed a deeper color to disguise the wear, a plum silk that passed for respectable by candlelight and confessed everything by day. Her gloves had been mended along the seam with thread. She had tinted herself to match, a trick of the eye she was rather proud of. Her slippers belonged to her cousin Delphine, and were half a size too small, so that every step was a quiet negotiation with pain. She had learned long ago not to let the negotiation show on her face. Her father had taught her that. Among other things, Ambrose Ashdown had been a restorer and a dealer of paintings. Not a fashionable one, but a good one, the sort other men quietly summoned when a canvas they had paid a fortune for turned out to be a clever lie. He could stand before a darkened varnish and tell you, to the decade when it had been painted, by the way the shadows were laid and the ground beneath them prepared. He had taught his daughter to see the same way, to look past the picture the world wished you to see, and find the truer things sleeping underneath. It was a useful skill for authenticating a Dutch landscape. It was a dangerous one for surviving Lady Sabina Crestwood. Her aunt, she was not truly an aunt, only the widow of Verity's late uncle. But she had claimed the title along with the family's money the moment both men were safely in the ground, had taken Verity in at 13, with a great show of Christian charity, and had extracted the cost of it every day since. There were no wages for the girl who catalogued the collection, cleaned the frames, and quietly repaired the small damages that would have cost a guinea apiece to send out. There was only a narrow room over the kitchens, a place at the far end of the table, and the constant wearing reminder that she ate on sufferance. So the invitation had been a shock. It had arrived 3 days ago on stiff cream card, and Lady Sabina had presented it across the breakfast table with a smile that did not reach past her front teeth. The Ravenel Ball, Verity. Lady Hesper has been so kind as to include you. Delphine and I shall want the carriage to ourselves. Naturally, you understand, but you shall have your evening. A pause, delicate as a laid trap. Do wear something that won't shame us. Verity was not a fool. She had lived under that roof for 10 years, and she knew the precise weight of every kindness her guardian dispensed, which was to say, she knew that kindness from Lady Sabina was never free and never ever kind. Somewhere in the arrangement was a hook. She simply could not yet see where it was set. But she had a little money of her own, saved in secret over years, a gown that would pass, and one thing she had never quite been able to kill: the small, stubborn hope that the world might, just once, let her in. She had gone. The carriage lurched to a halt behind a line of far grander vehicles, their lamps making long gold smears in the wet. Through the window, Verity could see the great house blazing at every casement, and above the din of hooves and coachmen she could hear it, the ball itself, a warm swell of music and laughter pouring out into the cold like heat from an open oven. For a moment, she let herself simply look at it. The light, the people, a world she had been born to the edge of and never allowed inside. Then she gathered her mended gloves, drew a breath that tasted of straw and violets, and stepped down into the night. The hook, wherever it was, would show itself soon enough. The staircase was the first thing she saw, and it was magnificent. It rose from the entrance hall in a single pale sweep of marble, wide enough for 6 to climb abreast, its balustrade dressed with hothouse roses and 1,000 points of candlelight that trembled as the doors opened and closed. At its foot, the cream of society moved in a slow, glittering current toward the ballroom above, silk and superfine, diamonds winking at throats, the air thick with beeswax, hot wax, and 100 warring scents. Verity joined the current and let it carry her upward, and for the length of that climb she almost believed the evening might be ordinary. Near the top stood the master of ceremonies, a narrow, dust-dry man named Mr. Tyr. Sedgwick, resplendent in black, a long list held before him like a hymnal. Beside him, receiving her guests with the fixed radiance of a woman who has counted every candle and knows exactly what the night cost her, stood the hostess, Lady Hesper Ravenel, Marchioness of Velacourt, whose ball this was and whose approval could make or unmake a girl in a single evening. Verity gave her name: Miss Ashdown. Miss Verity Ashdown. Mr. Sedgwick's gloved finger traveled down the list. It traveled down again. A small crease appeared between his brows, and something cold turned over in Verity's stomach before her mind had even named it. "I'm afraid I do not find you, miss." "You will find me under Ashdown," she said evenly. "I came at Lady Ravenel's invitation." At her own name, the Marchioness turned. Her gaze moved over Verity, the plum silk, the mended gloves, the 2 small slippers, with the unhurried thoroughness of a woman pricing a horse she has no intention of buying, Martin 9c, and Verity, who had spent 10 years learning to read the truth beneath the varnish, saw the whole of it in an instant. There was no surprise in that face. There was only satisfaction. She had not been forgotten. She had been scheduled. "I extended no invitation to a Miss Ashdown," Lady Hesper said, pitching her clear, carrying voice a fraction louder than the moment required, precisely loud enough. Around them heads began to turn, conversations dying mid-word, the delicious hush of a scandal being born. How curious. One does hear of young women who forge a card to force an entrance where they are not wanted. I had not thought to see it done so brazenly, and in such a sad little gown. A ripple of laughter, soft and cruel, moved down the stairs. And there, 3 steps below, exactly where she would have the finest view, stood Delphine Crestwood in ice-blue satin, one gloved hand pressed to her lips, to smother a smile that her eyes made no effort to hide the hook. There it was at last, sunk clean through the bone. The invitation had never been kindness. It had been a stage, built and lit and peopled. And Verity had walked to the very center of it in her cousin's borrowed shoes, It was what they were waiting for. The tears, the stammered denial, the ugly scramble backward down the stairs that would be recounted at 100 breakfast tables by noon. The Ashdown creature forging her way into Velacourt, threw herself up the stairs and was thrown down them. It would finish her. It would keep her over the kitchens forever. Verity did not weep. She looked the Marchioness full in the face, and she said, in a voice low and steady, and clear enough to carry no further than it must, "The card is genuine. Madam, I should know a forgery when I hold one, but I see now that the hand that wrote it did not mean a word." Then she inclined her head. Not a servant's bow, but the small, precise courtesy of an equal taking her leave, and she turned to go, before the first tear could betray her. And that was when she felt it, the oddest sensation prickling up the back of her neck through all the heat and noise, the certainty of being watched. She lifted her eyes. High above the turning heads, at the very top of the grand staircase where the candlelight thinned into shadow, a man stood alone against the balustrade. He was not watching the dancers. He was not watching the hostess. He was watching her, had been watching, she understood, with a jolt, for some time. And as she stood frozen on the stair with 300 people waiting for her to break, the man in the shadows pushed away from the railing, and without the slightest hurry, began to come down. He came down the staircase without hurry, and the whole ballroom rearranged itself around him as he came. Verity felt the change before she understood it, a shift in the pitch of the crowd, 100 conversations dropping half an octave at once. The glittering current on the stairs, which a breath ago had been so eager to close over her and sweep her out into the night, now drew back against the walls. Fans went still. A dowager near the landing said a name in the sort of whisper that travels, Black Mere. And then the name again passed, hand to hand down the marble like a dropped coin. Blackmere, Blackmere, the Duke of Blackmere, carrying the particular hush a room reserves for a man it is glad to see, only from a distance. Verity knew the name the way everyone knew it. Lucan Vaughan, Duke of Blackmere, who had not set foot in a London ballroom in 7 years, who kept to his great cold house at Greywater and his still greater collection of pictures, who was said, the tale changed with the teller, to have broken a man for lying to him about a canvas, and to have declined a royal summons on the grounds that he was occupied. He was the figure ambitious mothers used to frighten idle daughters. He was not, by any account Verity had ever heard, a man who crossed a crowded hall toward a girl in a 4-season gown while 300 people forgot to breathe. Yet he was crossing it now, tall, dark, unhurried, a hard, still face, and pale gray eyes that had not once left hers. He stopped an arm's length from her. And then, before he said a single word, before the Marchioness could recover her tongue, before Delphine could remember to shut her mouth, before Verity herself could find the breath to speak, the Duke of Blackmere bowed to her. Not the shallow dip a gentleman spares a stranger. A full bow, deep and deliberate and correct, the bow owed to a woman of the first consequence in the land, and held a heartbeat longer than courtesy could explain, long enough that every soul on that staircase knew they had seen it, and knew what it was meant to say. He straightened. He drew the glove from his right hand, and he held that bare hand out to her. The silence was complete. Verity looked at the hand. Long-fingered, faintly stained, along the edge with something she would later learn was pigment, and then, up at the face above it, and found there none of the things she had braced against. Not pity, which she could not have survived, not gallantry, which she would not have believed, something stranger and steadier, attention. The whole unnerving attention of a man studying a thing he has been hunting a long while and never thought to find in so plain a frame. She laid her mended glove across his palm. He turned his head unhurried to the hostess, who had gone the exact gray-white of her own candles, and considered her with a mild and terrible courtesy. "Lady Ravenel." His voice was low and quite without heat, which made it far worse than shouting. "I see my invitation has caused you some little confusion. Permit me to settle it. Miss Ashdown attends this evening at my particular request. Any door closed to her tonight is a door closed to me, and I should be inconsolable to leave so soon, having only this moment arrived. It was a lie." Verity knew it for a lie. She had watched the surprise cross his own face a moment before he mastered it. But it was spoken with such flat, unanswerable authority that truth ceased to have any bearing on the matter. Already the story was rewriting itself, table by table and fan by fan, no longer the Ashdown creature thrown down the Velacourt stairs, but Blackmere broke 7 years' silence for a Miss Ashdown. "Who is she?" Of course, Your Grace," the Marchioness said faintly. "A misunderstanding, Miss Ashdown, is most welcome." "I know," said the Duke. And he led her up the very stairs she had been turned from, past the marble face of her cousin Delphine, past Mr. Sedgwick and his useless list, into the light and heat of the ballroom, while the crowd bent them through like a wheat field going down before wind. At the top, where the music ran loudest and no single voice could be marked and set down, he inclined his head toward hers and spoke, for the first time as though he meant the words for her alone. "You said something on the stair, Miss Ashdown, that you would know a forgery when you held one." The pale gray eyes moved over her face, patient and exact. "I find I very much need to learn whether that was a figure of speech or the plain truth. Rather more depends on your answer than you could presently guess." He did not wait for her answer among the dancers. Instead, he drew her, with a hand at her elbow that asked rather than ordered, beneath an arch and along a short corridor, until the music thinned to a murmur behind them, and they came out into a long gallery lit by a single branch of candles. Portraits hung in the dimness on either side, hunting scenes, a brace of painted pheasants, a row of Velacourt ancestors all wearing the same disappointing chin. Verity's eyes went to them from habit, the way another woman's might have gone to a looking-glass. "Well," said the Duke. He had stopped beneath a large, dark canvas and was watching her. "Not it. You cannot help yourself. I saw you do it on the stair. You read that whole vicious little performance the moment it began. So read these. Tell me what you see." It was a test. She recognized it, and something in her, worn thin by the evening, decided she was too tired to fail it gently. "That one is a good copy of a better picture," she said, nodding to the hunting scene. The hound in front was added later by a clumsier hand. "Look at the outline. It sits on top of the grass instead of in it. That portrait has been cut down. The composition is starved on the left. And the large one you are standing under, Your Grace, which I imagine the family calls a vand, and insures as one, was painted a full generation after Emmerich Vand was in his grave. The blue is wrong. He never had that blue. No one had it until the Prussians made it in a factory." For a long moment, the Duke of Blackmere said nothing at all. Then, very quietly, he began to laugh, a low, rough, unpracticed sound, as though the machinery of it had rusted from long disuse. "The Prussians made it in a factory," he repeated. "Do you know I have paid 3 separate experts a great deal of money, and not one of them dared tell me that picture was wrong? And you did it across a dark room in a borrowed gown, in under a minute, without being asked twice." "I was asked once," said Verity. "That was sufficient." "Yes, He studied her. I begin to think it was. She let a small silence pass, and then she said the thing she had come into the gallery to say, because a debt left unspoken sat badly with her. You lied for me, Your Grace, in front of that entire room. I do not know why, and I will not insult us both by pretending I don't know what you spared me, but I would rather understand a kindness than be grateful for a mystery. Why did you come down those stairs? He was quiet a moment, choosing. Partly because I loathe a room that hunts in a pack, he said. I have been the fox. It is not a thing one forgets. Then his mouth twisted, dry. But chiefly, Miss Ashdown, because of what you said as you turned to go. I have been looking for a person who could say that sentence and mean it for the better part of a year, and here you were being thrown out a door for it. Looking for what, exactly? He did not answer directly. He reached inside his coat and took out a small object wrapped in oilcloth, no larger than a playing card, and unfolded it, and held it to the candle for her to see. It was a fragment of canvas, cut clean, a few square inches of a painted night sky, and the edge of a lantern's glow. A year and a half ago, he said, I bought a painting for a sum I will not embarrass either of us by naming, a nocturne. A figure keeping watch by lamplight on the eve of a battle, a masterwork, the only one of its kind thought, lost for 40 years and lately, miraculously found again. The Vigil by Emmerich Vand. His jaw tightened. A superb one, superb enough that I did not doubt it until it had hung in my own house for 6 months, and the doubt would no longer let me sleep. This is a scrap I cut from its lining. I have been trying, ever since, to find the one thing every forger of this quality leaves behind, and the one man who can read it. Verity's mouth had gone dry. And the real one? That, said the Duke, is the question that has emptied my nights. If a forgery this fine exists, then somewhere the genuine Vigil exists to have been copied from. Someone owns it. Someone hid it, sold the lie for a fortune, and kept the truth. I mean to find both, the picture and the hand, behind the fraud. He folded the oilcloth closed. The trail goes cold in the same place every time I follow it, an estate. A dispersal of pictures, cheaply sold, some years ago by a widow clearing her late husband's rooms. The husband was a dealer, a restorer, a man with, by every account I can gather, an eye very like your own. The candle guttered. Somewhere far off the orchestra swung into a reel. What was his name? Verity heard herself ask, though the whole of her already knew, had known since the word dealer, the way one knows a step is missing in the dark the instant before the fall. The Duke watched her with those pale, patient, pitiless eyes. Ashdown, he said. Ambrose, Ashdown. I rather think, Miss Ashdown, that you knew him. The gallery seemed to tilt very slightly, the way a floor does on a ship, and Verity put one mended glove flat against the cold paneling, to keep the world where it belonged. He was my father, she said. To his credit, the Duke did not pounce on it. He did not press, or crow, or produce a contract. He only waited, without hurry, without appetite, while she sank onto the broad stone window-seat, and the worst of the shock ebbed from her face, and he did not speak again until it had. Then we are neither of us where we thought we stood an hour ago, he said, and settled at the far end of the window-seat. So let us be plain with one another, since we are the only two people in this house not performing. Tell me about the dispersal of your father's collection. Tell me who conducted it. Leave nothing out, on the grounds that it does you no credit. I have no interest in your credit. I have an interest in the truth, and you appear to be the last living person in England who owns any of it, so she told him. She told him of her father's death when she was 13, of how the collection, his life's work, a few dozen pictures and a lifetime of knowing which were worth keeping, had been sold within the year, quietly and cheaply. She told him that Lady Sabina Crestwood had called the pictures dark old rubbish, and the debts pressing, and had sold the lot to a single dealer for a fraction of their worth, and had told the child Verity, when she wept for them, that sentiment was a luxury for people who could pay their own way. And was there, said the Duke, very carefully, among the dark old rubbish, a nocturne, a watcher, by lamplight? Verity was silent for a long moment. When she answered, her voice had changed. There was a small dark painting. My father would not let anyone touch, she said. Not the servants, not the buyers who came to the house. He cleaned it himself. I asked him once why he kept a picture so plain when he sold so many pretty ones, and he said her throat closed. She made it open again. But, he said, because it is the only honest thing in this house, and one day it will tell the truth for us when no one else will. I was 12. I thought he was being sentimental. He never was sentimental about anything else in his life. Where is it now? I don't know. And that, she realized, was the cruelest thread of all. It went with the rest. Sabina sold everything. I never saw where it landed. The Duke sat back. In the candlelight, the hard planes of his face had gone thoughtful, and something else, something that, in a warmer man, she might have called hope, held on a very short leash. Then here is where we are, he said. I have a forgery and no forger. You have a father slandered by his silence and a fortune sold out from under you by a woman who called it rubbish. Somewhere between us is the genuine vigil, and I would wager Greywater itself that the hand that sold me the lie is the same hand that emptied your father's rooms, and that both trails run back to your Lady Sabina and whatever dealer she found so convenient. Separately, Miss Ashdown, we have each spent a great deal of time getting nowhere. Together, he spread his stained hands. Together we might be a genuine inconvenience to some very comfortable people. You are proposing a partnership, Verity said slowly. I am proposing an arrangement, he corrected, and for the first time that evening, something like humor warmed the gray of his eyes. I have the resources, solicitors, money, a name that opens doors, and a name that, when I choose, closes them rather harder. What I lack is an eye. You have the finest eye I have ever encountered, and the strongest motive I could ask for, and, forgive me, nothing whatever to lose. That you have not already lost tonight on a staircase, I would have you at Greywater. Not as a guest to be gossiped over, as the person who authenticates my collection, unpicks this fraud, and helps me hang the truth back on the wall. You would be paid, and paid properly, and housed, and left the devil alone to work. And your Lady Sabina, he stopped, and let the sentence hang the way a man lets a door stand open, would learn, Verity finished quietly, that the ward she threw away did not come crawling back. She would read of it in the papers, the Duke agreed, which I understand is how she prefers to receive her news. The columns are already writing about you tonight, Miss Ashdown, whether you will or no. The only question left open is what they write. That you were turned from a door, or that you walked out of it on the arm of the one man in England they are all afraid of, and were not seen in town again. I confess I have a preference. Verity looked at him, this cold, exacting, unlikely man who had come down a staircase for a sentence, who carried a scrap of his own ruin folded in oilcloth against his heart, who had given her the plain truth and a moment to steady herself before he made his offer. He was not kind, exactly. He was something rarer and more useful than kind. He saw clearly, and he did not look away from what he saw. And she thought of her father, cleaning a plain, dark canvas by candlelight, saying one day, "It will tell the truth. For us, I will need my father's records," she said. "Whatever survived, and I will need to know I am free to follow the truth wherever it goes. Even if it leads somewhere, your grace would rather it did not." "Especially then," said the Duke. "Then we have an arrangement." She rose, and this time it was she who inclined her head, precise as a signature. "Where do we begin?" He stood and offered her his bare hand a second time, and this time she took it without hesitation. "We begin," said the Duke of Blackmere, "by finding out who bought your father's pictures. But not tonight." His mouth curved. "Tonight, Miss Ashdown, we are going to go back into that ballroom, and you are going to dance one dance with me in front of every person who watched you turned away. And then we are going to leave together, early, and let them talk themselves hoarse. Consider it the first honest use I have ever made of my reputation." And as he drew her back toward the music and the light, Verity Ashdown, who had come to Velacourt to be broken, and had instead been seen, felt the small stubborn thing in her chest that she had never quite managed to kill flare up bright and dangerous as a struck match. It was not hope, precisely. Hope was a luxury for people who could pay their own way. It felt a great deal more like a reckoning. Greywater Hall stood, 4 hours north of London, at the end of an avenue of limes so old their branches had grown together overhead into a long green tunnel, and when the carriage came out of it, the house was suddenly there, grey, enormous, and unsmiling, a great square block of a place that seemed to have decided, some centuries ago, that it had no further use for charm. Verity loved it on sight. It was not the love of comfort. The house was cold in the way. Only very large houses can be, with corridors that breathed a permanent draught, and a hall in which one's footsteps echoed like an accusation. It was that everywhere she looked, there were pictures. They lined the stairs and crowded the passages and hung 3 deep in rooms no one ever entered, and they were. She saw within the first hour the finest private collection she had ever stood among, and the worst kept. Varnish yellowing to treacle. Damp blooming in a corner of a Claude that should have been under glass in a palace. A man had spent a fortune and a lifetime gathering beauty, and then, it seemed, had simply stopped being able to bear looking at it. "His Grace does not come into the long gallery," said Mr. Redfern, the steward, as he showed her through. A spare, elderly man with a soldier's back and the careful, protective courtesy of a servant who has decided against long odds to like you not, for some years now. "You'll forgive me saying, Miss, it will do the room good to have someone in it who looks at the walls instead of the floor." She was given a workroom that had once been a still room, flooded with cold, northern light, the best light in the house for seeing true color, which told her the Duke had chosen it himself and said nothing. She was given an assistant materials, a key to every case and cabinet, and a wage written into a proper contract that she read 3 times, because the figure at the bottom was more money than her guardian had spent on her in 10 years. And she was given the forgery. They brought the vigil to her on the second morning, 2 footmen carrying it draped in Holland cloth as though it were a coffin, and set it on her easel, and left her alone with it. For a long while Verity simply stood before it, not touching, only looking, at the small painted figure keeping his lonely watch by a single lantern, the darkness pressing in from every side, the one warm point of light held up against a whole army of night. It was, she thought, a beautiful and terrible thing, and whoever had made it had loved the original past all reason. That was the first note she wrote in her book, and it troubled her more than any technical fault could have. P. This is not the work of a cheat, she wrote. A cheat forges a signature. This man forged a soul. He was not copying a picture. He was grieving one. The Duke came to her that evening, as she had half expected he would, and stood in the doorway of the still room, watching her work by lamplight, not speaking, only watching. In the way she was beginning to understand was simply how he had been made. She did not stop for him. She had learned under her guardian's roof that a woman who set down her work to be looked at was a woman inviting comment, and old habits die slowly. But when, at last, she laid aside her glass and pressed the heels of her hands to her aching eyes, he said quietly, "Tell me what you have." And she found that she wanted to, that the telling was itself a pleasure she had never been permitted. "Give me 4 days," she said, "and send no one to hurry me. A picture will give you the truth if you are patient with it, and lie to you the instant you are not." 4 days, he agreed, as though she had named a fair price for a thing he badly wanted, which she supposed she had. "You shall have as many as the truth requires, Miss Ashdown. I have waited a year already. I dare say I can manage a week." She worked for 4 days. She learned the forgery the way she had once learned her father's face, by lamplight at all hours, with a glass and a needle and infinite patience. She worked in raking light, the lamp set low and to one side so that every ridge of brushwork threw its own long shadow, and the picture gave up the secrets of its own making. She took the most cautious of samples from the extreme edge, where the frame would hide the small wound, and watched how each pigment met the solvent. She read the craquelure, the fine map of cracks that time lays over honest age, and that no forger, however gifted, has ever learned to counterfeit, and found it wrong too, even too shallow, too young, painted on rather than earned. She found the wrong blue the Duke's experts had missed and been too frightened to name. She found beneath the paint, in the ghostly underdrawing that only raking light revealed, the thing that made her set down her glass and sit very still. The forger had not worked from the finished picture, copying its surface as a cheat would. He had built it from the bones up, laying in the structure exactly as the master himself must have done, which meant he had not merely seen the vigil. He had studied it long and closely, with the real thing before his eyes, which meant the real thing was real and findable. And someone, somewhere, still had it. She was writing this down, her hand not quite steady, when she noticed the small portrait hanging alone in the shadowed alcove by the workroom door. A young man, perhaps 20, with the Duke's gray eyes and none of the Duke's stillness, laughing at the painter as though he had just been told a joke and could not wait to repeat it. There was a brush in his hand. The picture had been turned slightly to the wall, as though someone could not quite bring themselves to look at it, and could not quite bring themselves to take it down. "Who is he?" she had asked Mr. Plact. Redfern, that first day when the steward showed her the workroom. The old man had gone very still, and then very careful. "That is not for me to say, miss," he had answered, which was itself an answer, and had turned the conversation so gently that she had let him. She had not asked again. But she had noticed that someone dusted the little portrait faithfully, that no one ever spoke of it, that the Duke of Blackmere kept the finest collection in England and could not bring himself to walk the length of his own long gallery. And she had begun, restorer that she was, to see the shape of the wound beneath the varnish. Verity looked at the laughing young man a long time. Then she looked back at the forgery on her easel, at the loving, grieving, impossibly skilled hand that had built it bone by bone, and a cold thought moved through her that she was not yet ready to write in her book. The rhythm of grey water settled over her like snowfall, quiet and total and unexpectedly kind. Breakfast came early and alone. The Duke kept his own hours, which she gathered were no hours at all. A man who slept in fragments if he slept. But by mid-morning he would appear in the workroom doorway with 2 cups of coffee, black and scalding, and stand at her shoulder while she worked, saying little, asking the single exact question of a man who has spent his life learning to look and only lately met someone who could teach him to see. He did not hover. He did not flatter. When she was wrong, he told her so, and when she was right, he went very quiet, which she came to understand was the highest praise he owned. Once watching her lift a bloom of dead varnish from the corner of a landscape to reveal a startling living green beneath, he had said almost to himself, "My father bought that picture the year I was born. I have walked past it 10,000 times and never seen that green," and Verity had understood, then, that she was not merely mending his pictures. She was giving a man back the power to look at his own life, and that this was a far more dangerous gift to hand across a room and to receive than either of them had bargained for. She had not known, until Greywater, that it was possible to be spoken to as though one's mind were the most interesting thing in the room. In her guardian's house, her cleverness had been a fault to be hidden, like a squint. Here it was simply the reason she had been asked to stay. It was, she thought, the most dangerous luxury she had ever been offered, because it would be very hard to give up. Then, on the 9th day, the danger came up, the Lime Avenue in a hired chaise. She saw him from the workroom window. A soft, prosperous, apologetic sort of man, in an excellent coat, climbing down and looking up at the grey house, with the expression of a cat that has talked its way into a dairy. Something in the tilt of his head reached back across 10 years, and closed cold fingers round her throat, and she was already moving, already down the stairs, before she had consciously named him. Mr. Redfern was admitting him to the hall. "Mr. Josiah Pettifer," the steward announced in a voice carefully stripped of opinion, "to see his grace on a matter of business." "Pettifer," said Verity. From the 3rd stair, the dealer turned. She watched him take her in, the good gown now, the assurance, now the cold northern light of the house behind her, and watched him fail, for one lovely moment, to place her. Then he did, and the color went out of his soft face like wine out of a tipped glass. Miss Ashdown," he said. "Little Verity. Good heavens, you've grown." "People do," she agreed. "You bought my father's collection, Mr. Pettifer." "All of it, from my guardian. For a sum I have lately had cause to calculate against its worth. I have wondered, these 10 years, where it all went." "Ah, a fair transaction," he said, recovering, spreading his plump hands. "Entirely above board, I assure you. Your aunt was most eager to be. Pay sure of the burden, and I. She is not my aunt, and it was not a burden. It was a fortune, and you knew it, and she did not, and you counted on the difference." Verity came down the last stairs slowly. "Why are you here?" He had come, it emerged, to make his grace a most generous offer. He had heard, one did hear things, that the Duke's celebrated vigil had lately fallen under some small, unworthy cloud of doubt. Pettifer, who had after all been present at its joyful rediscovery, wished only to set his grace's mind at ease. Indeed, if the picture were causing his grace any distress, Mr. Pettifer would take it off his hands entirely at the original price, a handsome gesture, a friend's gesture, and say no more about it. He had, in short, come to buy back the evidence. Verity watched him talk, and read him the way she read a canvas. Not the surface, which was all apology and warm good fellowship, but the anxious underdrawing beneath it. A man does not travel 4 hours to press a favor on a duke who has not asked for one. A man travels 4 hours because he is afraid, and Josiah Pettifer was afraid of precisely one thing in the world, that someone with an eye had at last come to stand between him and his buried fortune. "You are perspiring, Mr. Pland." "Pettifer," she observed, "in a cold hall I should have the fires seen to, if it were mine to see to." "How kind," said a low voice from the gallery door, and Mr. Pettifer flinched as though struck. The Duke of Blackmere stood leaning in the frame of it, and how long he had been there no one could say. "How very generous, to relieve me of a picture I have not said I wish to sell. Tell me, Pettifer, since you were present at its rediscovery, from whom precisely did you rediscover it?" A private collection, Your Grace. Discretion, you understand, is the soul of your profession. Yes, you have said." The Duke's voice did not rise. Discretion. It is a wonderful word when a dealer uses it. It means only that the true answer would hang him. "Miss Ashdown," said the Duke without taking his eyes from the dealer, "is that picture upstairs genuine?" "No," said Verity clearly. "It is a forgery. A magnificent one, painted by a man of real genius from close study of the original, which means the genuine Vigil exists and passed through this man's hands, and that he sold my father's collection knowing what was in it, and has been selling the lie ever since while hiding the truth." The silence in the great cold hall was absolute. Mr. Pettifer's mouth worked. The girl is a disappointed creature with a grievance, Your Grace. She cannot possibly. "She did in 4 days," said the Duke, "what 3 experts and a year could not. I would think very carefully, Mr. Radis, Pettifer, about which of you I am inclined to believe." He pushed off the doorframe and crossed the hall, unhurried, and stopped rather closer to the dealer than the dealer liked. "You will go now. And you will understand that the picture stays, and Miss Ashdown stays, and that I have a long purse and a longer memory and nothing whatever to do with my evenings, but pull, slowly, on every thread you have left hanging." Pettifer is leaving. The dealer went, but at the door he turned, and the apology had gone out of his soft face, and something oilier and more frightened had come into it. "You always did keep dangerous company, Your Grace," he said. "Your family has such a history of it." His eyes flicked, just once, toward the gallery, toward the shadowed place where a laughing young man hung with his face to the wall, and then he was gone, and the door boomed shut behind him. Verity's heart was going hard, but her voice, when she found it, came out level. "He came to measure how much you know," she said, "and he leaves having learned that you know all of it, which means he will now do one of 2 things. He will run, or he will go straight to the only other person with as much to lose as he has, and warn her that the girl the 2 of them buried between them has climbed out of the grave." She thought of claret velvet and a smile that never reached the teeth. "He will not run. His kind never does. They send a woman to do their frightening for them." Verity felt the Duke go still beside her, still as she had never seen a living man go. "Still, Your Grace," she said carefully. "The young man in the portrait by my workroom, with your eyes and a brush in his hand." She had to say it. "Who was he?" For a long moment she thought he would not answer. "My brother," said the Duke of Blackmere at last. "Peregrine. He is dead." And something in the flatness of it, the way the word had been worn smooth as a stone carried too long in a pocket, told Verity that the wound she had been tracing beneath the varnish ran all the way down to the canvas. And he walked back into the dark of the gallery alone, and did not come out again that day. She did not go to him that night, though she lay awake and heard him. The uneven prowl of a sleepless man moving through his own house in the small hours, the particular silence of a person keeping company with something that will not let him rest. She went to him the third night, because by then she was certain, and certainty was the only gift she had that was worth giving him. For 2 nights she did not sleep either. She worked the little lantern study against the forgery upstairs, mark for mark the loop of a highlight, the exact way a loaded brush had been dragged and then lifted, the small unrepeatable habits of a hand, as unmistakable as a voice heard through a wall. She did not want to be right, so she checked and checked again, and set traps for her own hope, because her father had taught her that the most dangerous forgery of all is the one you wish were true. And each test returned the same verdict, quiet and pitiless. The same hand had made them both. She found him in the long gallery, where he never went, sitting on the cold floor with his back against the wall, beneath a shrouded canvas and a single guttering candle beside him, a decanter untouched at his elbow. He did not look up when she came in. He looked, she thought, like a man sitting the last watch over something already lost. The shrouded canvas above him was not empty. He had had the forgery carried down from her workroom in the night and hung it here, in the one room he could not bear to enter, and then covered it, so that he might sit beneath the thing that had broken him, without being made to see it. It was the act of a man keeping a wound and refusing to look at it. Verity had spent her whole life among people who could not look at things. She knew the only cure there was. "You should not see me like this," he said. "I have seen a great deal worse," said Verity, and sat down on the floor beside him, arranging her skirts as though the cold flags of a ducal gallery were the most natural place in the world to hold a conversation. She set down the thing she had brought. Not brandy, not comfort, but her book, and a small square of canvas and a lamp which she lit, because she had learned long ago that the kindest thing you could offer a person in the dark was not pity, but light, and something true to look at. "I know who painted your forgery," she said. He went rigid. "I did not want to be right," she said quietly. "So I was slow, and I was careful, and I checked it against everything I had, because you deserved certainty and not a cruelty, dressed up as one. The hand that made the vigil upstairs, the loving hand, the grieving hand, the one good enough to fool all of England. I have matched it, your grace, past any doubt I own." She turned the small square of canvas to the lamp. "This is a fragment my father kept in his records, a study of a lantern unsigned, that he noted only as the Vaughan boys. The best young hand I ever saw ruined by a great name. Your brother painted your forgery, Lucan, years ago, from long study of the real thing, not to cheat anyone. To be, for once, as good as the master, everyone told him he could never touch. He used to bring me his work," the Duke said, "to the floor, to the dark, to no one, when we were boys. Before our father died, and it all. Before. He would carry a canvas the whole length of that gallery, so proud he could scarcely hold his face still, and set it in front of me. And I told him I was 22, and I had just come into more than any man ought to have. I told him a Vaughan did not make a tradesman of himself with a paintbrush, that he embarrassed the name, that he should find something worthier of it." His voice cracked clean across. "He never brought me another. He worked in secret after that wherever they sent him, and he died of a fever in a rented room in Rome with a half-finished canvas by the bed, and I was told of it 3 weeks after they had already put him in the ground. And I have hung his eyes on my wall, and turned them to face it, because I could not bear to be looked at by the last thing I ever saw clearly, and then refused to see. The sound the Duke made was not a word. They told him he was a Duke's brother playing at paint, Verity went on gently, relentlessly, because he needed all of it, and needed it now. You told him, I think. And he believed you, because you were the one whose seeing meant the most. And then he made that, she nodded up at the shrouded canvas, the finest thing to come out of England in 40 years, good enough that the greatest eye in the country hung it in his own house and called it a miracle. He proved you all wrong, Your Grace. He simply did not live to hear you say so, and Pettifer sold his triumph as another man's, and let his name die twice. Lucan Vaughan put his face in his stained hands, and the Duke of Blackmere, who had broken a man for lying about a canvas, whom mothers used to frighten daughters, wept, silently and terribly, on the cold floor of a room he could not bear to enter. Verity did not tell him it would pass. She did not touch his shoulder, or murmur, or offer him the decanter. She reached out and took one of his hands down from his face. The bare, ruined, pigment-stained hand he had held out to her twice now, and she held it, hard, in both of her own, and she made him look at the small, honest fragment of his brother's work glowing in the lamplight, so that the first thing he saw, when he could see again, was proof that the boy had been a genius after all. You asked me, on the stairs, she said, whether I could truly read a thing, or whether it was a figure of speech. Her voice was fierce and low, and did not shake. I have been reading you since the top of that staircase, Your Grace, since before you ever came down. I saw a man everyone else was afraid to look at, holding up one small light against a great deal of dark, exactly like the boy your brother painted. I have spent my whole life being the honest thing in the room that no one troubles to read. I know precisely what it is. So believe me when I tell you what I see now, because I have never once been wrong about a picture, and I am not wrong about this. You did not fail to see him. You are the only one still looking. He turned his hand in hers until their fingers laced, stain and mend together, and he held on the way a drowning man holds on. And for a long time in that cold and shrouded room neither of them said anything at all, and neither of them let go. The candle guttered low, and neither moved to replace it. Somewhere in the vast sleeping house a clock told an hour that no longer mattered to anyone. Verity had knelt beside a great many broken things in her life, and coaxed them, slowly, back toward the truth of themselves. She had never been so sure that she held something worth the saving. The real one, he said at last, hoarse, when he could speak. The genuine vigil. If Pettifer hid it, then he hid it to sell, said Verity. And a man like that never destroys a fortune. He only buries it until it is safe. We find the burial. And when we do, Your Grace, she felt the reckoning flare up in her again, bright and dangerous as a struck match. Your brother's name goes on his own painting, and my father's truth comes off the back of the other, and the two people who called them both rubbish learn precisely what rubbish is worth. It took them 5 weeks and the whole weight of the Duke's long arm to run the buried fortune to ground. They made, in those weeks, an odd and formidable pair. He was relentless where she was exact. He had a duke's power to summon a man, and a duke's patience to sit in silence, until that man lied. She had the eye that could tell them, from a single description, whispered by a frightened clerk, whether the picture in some distant strong-room could possibly be the one they hunted. She learned the cold pleasure of watching him work, the terrible stillness of him, the way one soft word could open a locked strong-box faster than another man's fist. He learned to bring her every scrap the solicitors turned up, and to wait, uncomplaining, while she found in it the one line that mattered. Neither of them spoke again of the night in the gallery. neither needed to. It was simply there, now, beneath everything, the way the underdrawing lies beneath the paint, unseen, and holding the whole composition together. Verity found the thread. The Duke pulled it. Pettifer, it transpired, was a careful man in all things but debt, and a dealer who buries a masterwork must still insure it, still store it, still whisper of it to the one or two buyers rich and discreet enough to want a thing that legally does not exist. The Duke's solicitors followed the whispers. A bill of lading, a warehouse in the docks under a name that was not Pettifer's, but paid its rent from an account that was, and in a crate, packed in oilcloth and Spanish cedar, wrapped as tenderly as its forgery had been, the genuine vigil, the true one, the master's own, the watcher and his one small light against the night, came home to Greywater at last, and Verity Ashdown authenticated it in an afternoon, and wept over it in a way she had not wept over anything since she was 13 years old, because she had turned it over. And there on the reverse, in the small, precise restorer's hand, she had known before she could read, her father had written the truth and left it waiting, exactly as he had promised a frightened girl he would. Emmerich Vand, the vigil, genuine beyond question, OAA it read, and beneath it in the same careful hand, bought honestly, kept honestly. If it is ever sold as a copy, the seller knew its worth and lied. Let this stand as my word against theirs when I am not here to give it. Ambrose Ashdown. One honest thing, Verity whispered, and one day it will tell the truth for us. She pressed her palm flat to the old canvas, over her father's writing, and for the first time in 10 years, she did not feel like a ghost at the edge of a family that did not want her. She felt like an heir. They did not have long to savor it. Society, having decided that the reappearance of a duke it had buried alive was the year's great sport, had followed the story north, and where society went, Lady Sabina Crestwood was never far behind, particularly not once the whispers reached her that her discarded ward was somehow at the bottom of it all. She arrived on a hard, bright morning without warning, sweeping into the great hall of Greywater in claret velvet and cold fury, her daughter Delphine trailing behind her like a nervous shadow, and she did not wait to be announced. "So," she said when Verity came down the stairs to meet her, "it is true. You have installed yourself here, like a thing, and let this recluse ruin what little name my charity ever bought you, and drag the Crestwood family through every drawing-room in England." Her eyes raked the hall, the pictures, the evidence of belonging, and hated all of it. "You will pack you a box and come home this hour, Verity, and be grateful I troubled to fetch you. You are my ward, you are mine to fetch. And if his grace imagines otherwise," she rounded on the Duke, who had come to stand at the gallery door silent, "I will have my solicitor before a magistrate by Friday, and I will tell that magistrate a very sad story of a gentlewoman lured away from her family and held at this house against her will. See how your name survives that, your grace, recluse or no." The Duke did not answer. He looked instead at Verity, and Verity, who had spent 10 years flinching at exactly that voice, found to her wonder that it had gone small and far away. The voice of a woman shouting from the wrong end of a telescope. For 10 years that voice had been the whole weather of her life, the thing she woke to and slept beneath and shaped herself around. She had believed, without ever quite daring to think it, that she would fear it until the day she died. And here it was now, filling the great hall of Greywater at full strength, and it could not touch her, not because a duke stood in the doorway behind her, because she had turned a painting over 3 days ago and read her father's hand upon the back of it, and learned at last that she had never been the worthless thing this woman had spent a decade insisting she was. "I am 23, madam," Verity said. "I have not been anyone's ward to fetch these 2 years, as any magistrate will tell you before he laughs you from his chambers. But we needn't waste his morning on that. Let us give him something worthier of it." Her voice did not rise. "You sold my father's collection to Josiah Pettifer for £400. Lady Sabina blinked. "I sold a pile of dark rubbish for rather more than it was. You sold 31 pictures," said Verity, "worth at the most careful valuation upward of £20,000, and among them one worth more than everything else together. You called it a copy. You told a weeping child it was sentimental trash. And you took £400 for it, because you could not tell the difference between rubbish and a fortune, and you never troubled to ask the one person in your house who could." She walked to the gallery door, and the 2 footmen carried out the draped canvas, and set it on the stand that had been made ready, and drew off the cloth. "This is Emmerich Van's Vigil, Lady Sabina, the genuine one. The one you sold as a copy. It has been valued this week, for insurance, at £11,000. The color drained from her guardian's face, exactly as it had drained from Pettifer's. And this," said Verity, and turned the great painting around so that the writing on the back stood plain in the cold north light, "is my father's hand, recording what it was worth and swearing that whoever sold it as a copy knew and lied. His word, Lady Sabina. Kept 10 years for precisely this morning. Shall I read the magistrate this sad story? Of a widow who defrauded her dead husband's estate and her orphaned ward of the better part of £20,000, in concert with a dealer my solicitors can now place, by warehouse and bill and account, in possession of stolen goods. For, I promise you, madam, His Grace has the appetite for that particular tale, and rather more evidence than you have." "I have taken the liberty," said the Duke from the gallery door in the pleasant, level tone that had emptied better rooms than this one, "of having copies made, of every document of Mr. Pettifer's warehouse accounts, of the bill of lading that carried a stolen masterpiece to a dock under a false name. My solicitor holds one set. The magistrate's clerk holds another, sealed, to be opened, should any misfortune, whatever, befall Miss Ashdown's good name." He smiled, "and there was nothing kind in it at all. So do go on threatening us, Lady Sabina. I have quite lost the habit of being threatened, and I confess I am curious to learn whether it still frightens me." "You would not dare," Lady Sabina breathed. "The scandal— I have already survived the worst you could do to me," said Verity. "You did it on a staircase, in front of 300 people, and I walked back up it. I have nothing left that you can take, but you, madam," and here she felt no triumph, only a cold and final quiet. "You have a name, and a daughter yet to marry, and a very great deal to lose. So here are my terms, and they are the only ones you will be offered. You will restore to me, in full, the value of my father's collection, of which His Grace has kindly advanced me the means to see enforced. You will never again speak my name, or my father's in any drawing-room in England. And you will go back down that avenue this hour and understand that the girl you sent to be laughed out of the world did not come home, and never will." For a long moment, Lady Sabina Crestwood stood in the great cold hall, her mouth working, her fury curdling into something that had no bravado left in it at all. Then she turned, and took her white-faced daughter by the arm, and went, and the great door of Greywater boomed shut behind her, and the sound of her carriage faded down the lime avenue into nothing. Verity stood before her father's painting, and found that her hands were perfectly steady. Behind her, very quietly, the Duke of Blackmere said, Your father would be unbearably proud of you. As for what little it is worth am I. They hung both paintings that evening side by side, in the long gallery he could enter now, the genuine Vigil on the left, the master's own. And on the right, Peregrine's no longer a forgery, because the Duke had taken a pen, and in the corner where his brother had been too modest or too frightened to sign, written the boy's name himself, at last in a hand that was not quite steady. P. Vaughan, after Vand. 2 watchmen now, 2 small lights against the same great dark, and it was impossible to say which was the more beautiful, which had been made with the more love, and that, Verity thought. You are a wealthy woman now, the Duke said. He was looking at the paintings, not at her, and his voice had gone carefully level in a way she had learned to distrust. £9,000 restored, and more when the courts have finished with Pettifer. You need not authenticate another picture in your life if you do not wish to. You need not stay in a cold house at the wrong end of England, kept company by an ill-tempered man and his dead brother. A muscle moved in his jaw. You are free, Miss Ashdown, entirely. For the first time I made certain of it. I would not have you stay for want of anywhere else to go. I know too well what that is worth. So you may go, wherever you like. And there it was. The bill for his own ruin, folded in oilcloth against his heart. He had spent a year afraid to trust his own eye. Now he had handed her the means to leave, and was standing very still, waiting to be left, because a man who has been fooled once no longer believes the good things his own seeing tells him. She understood it completely, which was precisely why it made her so angry. It was the same wound she carried, only worn on the opposite side. She had been taught that she was worth nothing, and had half believed it. He had been taught that his judgment was infallible, and had built a whole life upon it. And then a single painting had made a liar of the one faculty he trusted, and dragged his brother's ghost down along with it. They were, the 2 of them, a matched pair, people who had stopped believing the evidence of their own eyes. The only difference was that she had spent her life learning, one honest picture at a time, to trust hers again. She knew the way back. She had walked every cold step of it. That is a remarkably stupid speech, said Verity, for a clever man. He turned. You spent 5 weeks and a fortune making me free, she said, crossing the gallery to stand before him, so that when I chose, you would know it was a choice and not a cage. It is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, and it is the most foolish, because it means you still have not understood the one thing I have been telling you since the floor of this room. She reached up and took his face in her hands, the hard, still, unbearable face no one else in England dared look at, and made him look at her. I do not stay in places because I have nowhere else to go. I learned that lesson on a staircase. I stay because I have finally found the one room in the world where I am read. You saw me before you ever came down those stairs, Lucan. You have not once since looked away. Do you truly imagine I would go and spend the rest of my life among people who cannot? I am not, he said low, an easy man to keep. No, she agreed. You are cold and sleepless and impossible, and you hang your grief on your walls. I would not have you the least bit otherwise. I have spent my whole life among pretty pictures that were lies. I find I would rather have one true thing, however dark, than a gallery full of copies. She smiled, the real one, the one without a single defensive shadow left in it. And you offered me your bare hand twice before you offered me a single kind word, I noticed. I have a very good eye. 2 offered hands and not one kind word, he repeated. That is a damning inventory. It is an honest one. I have built my whole life on reading what people do and mistrusting what they say, and you acted, Your Grace, before you had the first idea why. You came down a staircase for a stranger because you could not stand to watch a thing be broken. That is worth more to me than 1,000 pretty speeches. You have never made me a pretty speech, and I love you the more for it." She had not meant to say the last of it, and having said it, found she did not want it back. He made a sound that was half a laugh and half something raw, and he took her hands from his face and held them stained and mended together, the way he had held on in the dark. "Then stay," said the Duke of Blackmere, and it was not a command this time, and not an arrangement, and not a lie told loudly to a hostile room. It was only the truest thing he owned. "Not as my authenticator, not as my guest. Stay, because I have been alone in this house with my dead a very long time, and you are the only living person who has ever walked into the dark of it and lit a lamp. Marry me, Verity. Be the honest thing in my house. I will spend the rest of my life reading you, and I promise you I will never once look away." "I know," said Verity Ashdown, giving him back his own words. And she rose up there, beneath the 2 watchmen and their 2 small lights, and kissed him. He kissed her back the way he did everything he had decided to do, completely and without hurry, and as though the rest of the world could wait because it could. And above them the 2 watchmen kept their light, and for the first time the long gallery at Greywater did not feel to Verity like a room full of the dead. It felt like a room in which something at very long last had been brought back to life. They were married in the spring in the small grey church at the edge of the Greywater lands, with the lime avenue in new leaf, and a soft green light coming through it like a blessing. Verity did not wear the plum silk. She wore a gown the color of a Vand nocturne, deep and rich, and shot through with silver, where the light caught it, and she walked up the aisle on the arm of Mr. Sexton. Redfern, who had asked, with enormous dignity and eyes suspiciously bright, whether he might have the honor of standing in for the father who could not, and who wept openly through the whole ceremony while pretending fiercely that he did not. Mrs. Aldous held the ring. The little church smelled of cold stone and hothouse lilies, and faintly of the linseed and varnish that had soaked so deep into the Duke's hands over the past months that Verity had come to think of it simply as the smell of him. When the vicar asked whether she would take this man, she thought of a laughing boy with a brush, and of a father cleaning a plain dark canvas by candlelight, and of a scrap of writing kept 10 years against exactly such a morning as this. And she answered, "I will," in a voice that carried clear to the back of the empty pews, because she had spent quite long enough being unheard. There were no 300 watching strangers. There was no one, in fact, who had not earned the right to be there. The news reached London 3 days later, and it was not a scandal. It was a rout. The gossip columns, which had begun the season with a delicious little item about a forger in a sad gown thrown down the Velacour stairs, were obliged to end it by reporting that the same young woman had walked out of that ballroom on the arm of the Duke of Blackmere, unmasked a fraud that had fooled all of fashionable England. Wand recovered a lost masterpiece, restored a slandered painter's name, and become a duchess with a fortune of her own before the leaves were fully out. Lady Hesper Ravenel let it be known that she had always found Miss Ashdown a most singular creature. Lady Sabina Crestwood was not mentioned at all, having removed, very quietly, to a small house a very long way from anywhere that anyone she wished to impress might ever see her. Delphine, for her part, wrote her cousin a single short letter some months later, an awkward, careful, unexpected thing, in which she said only that she was sorry, that she had laughed on the stairs that night because she had been too frightened not to, and that she hoped Verity was happy. Verity read it twice and thought a while about the particular cowardice of frightened people, and wrote back that she was happy and that the door at Greywater was not closed. It was, the Duke observed dryly when she told him, considerably more mercy than the girl had earned. Yes, Verity agreed. But I have stood on the wrong side of a closed door. I find I have no taste for closing them on anyone else. And in the long gallery at Greywater, the room the Duke walked through now every single day, the two watchmen kept their vigils side by side, and beneath them, most mornings, a duchess sat on the cold floor with her back against the wall, her husband beside her, the two of them saying very little, and reading the light. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, Verity would think of that other staircase, the marble sweep of it, the turning heads, the footman's soft apology, the certainty that she was about to break. She had gone there to be laughed at. She had been so sure the joke was on her. But a joke needs an audience that does not understand it, and there had been one man, that night, standing above it all in the shadow at the top of the stairs, who had understood everything the moment he saw it. Not a girl in a sad gown forging her way in where she was not wanted, but a truth the whole glittering room had glanced at and dismissed. Exactly as it dismissed the plain dark pictures that turned out, in the end, to be worth more than everything hung around them. He had been watching all along, for exactly the sort of person the world was too foolish to read. She had walked in to be turned away. She had instead been seen, and being seen had never once been turned away again. Did Verity's triumph over Lady Sabina and Pettifer leave you cheering? There is nothing quite so satisfying as watching a quiet, brilliant woman refuse to break and win everything she was told she could never have, on her own terms and with her own remarkable gift. If you loved this slow-burning, emotional, historical romance, please tap that like button to support the channel. Share this story with anyone who adores a sharp, capable heroine and a brooding, devoted duke with a wounded heart. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next immersive audio drama. Tell me your favorite moment down in the comments below. I read every one.